Hi, Kathleen. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes, just wanted to check to make sure you could hear me okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, we'll get underway in a second. Okay, so my name is Bruce Miller and I'm with RimTech Consulting, and thank you for joining me today. Um, Tomorrow, you'll get an email from me with a recording of this session. Um, so we're going to cover event-driven record keeping in Purview, which is a major, major challenge. This is a tough stuff in Purview. Okay, so in order to truly understand how to deal with event-driven record keeping in Purview, there are 7 moving parts of Purview and SharePoint that you have to know. 7. And here they are. If you already know these 7, then you stand a chance of fully and completely understanding how event-driven records are handled. If you don't, then this is going to be an issue for you, okay? Um, I will cover a few of these points today, namely number 1, case records. But without knowing all of that other plumbing and moving parts inside SharePoint and Purview, there's no way to truly fully understand event-driven retention. It's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, and it takes a long time to explain it and a longer time to understand it. But not to worry, because what I am going to do is I'm going to give you the big picture of how Purview wants you to do it out of the box. Okay? It's a bit weird, it's a bit complicated, but I'll show you how it's done. And then I'm going to say, but don't do that. There's a there's a better approach. Do you have to do it the way I suggest? No. But I'm going to show you how I would go about it and how we do go about it in our live clients. I mean, we could just completely avoid the out of the box method and just go straight into an alternative, but I can't in all fairness do that. So don't worry about it if you don't understand all the intricate steps of handling event-based retention. Do not worry about it, okay? It's far too much for a 1 hour webinar anyway. And all of these moving parts that you see here, items 1 through 7, I have webinars and training courses on each of those. If you wanted just a quick overview, go for a webinar recording. If you want to get deep, just sign up for some training and we'll cover it in detail. But literally, these are the 7 things that are necessary just to do what I'm about to show you, okay? So this is, to me, this is the pinnacle of knowledge of Purview record keeping. This is the tough stuff. Now, there are 3 components we have to bring together for any EDRMS. In the example we're talking about today, we need to bring together the retention schedule, Purview, and SharePoint. Those are the 3 things we're going to have to bring together. Now, I'm assuming you've already got your retention schedule figured out. It is a software-ready retention schedule, and it's already in Purview, okay? If not, again, webinars and training courses on that, okay? So what does compliance mean? Well, what it means to me is that every document in SharePoint has a retention rule applied from the retention schedule. Number 2 is that all the documents are being managed as a record. And that means they are immutable, which in turn means nobody can delete or edit the document or its metadata. Every document is assigned a retention rule from the retention schedule. And this is what we're here to talk about today. 60% or more of all your records are event-based, right? So all of those events are recorded. We have all the dates and everything that Purview needs to manage those 60% of your records is in place. If all of the above is true, then we can finally get to number 3, which is the ultimate test of compliance. Can you do a disposition? In my opinion, 90, maybe even 95% or more of all EDRMS projects on this planet cannot do a disposition, which is the ultimate failure of an EDRMS. Let me put it the other way. The only way you can proceed with a disposition where you press one button and delete millions of documents in a single go is if you have enough confidence to do so. How do you get that confidence? Well, you have to be able to mathematically prove that 85% or higher of all of those millions and millions and millions of digital records are classified correctly to 85% or higher. And that requires some serious technique and measurement. Because a typical user or system with 1,000 users typically generates 12,000 records a day. And if you think that you can go in and check or fix any of that, you're dreaming. It's just not going to happen, okay? So you have to construct a system that can guarantee you classification accuracy in advance. Because if you lose it, it's too late because it's not fixable. So how do we make this happen? Well, welcome to record keeping in Purview. There are 3 secrets to Purview: knowing what features to avoid, which ones to work around, and when to custom program a solution. Okay? And Purview is pretty different from any other records management software on earth. In Microsoft's world view, compliance comes from the users, not from the organization. And that's backwards. It's wrong. We need to impose it on the users. And when Microsoft says records management, it's not what we know of as records management. It's a whole new way of looking at it from their point of view, and it's very technical, and you need to know a lot about their products. That would mean Purview and SharePoint. And when Microsoft says compliance, they're not just talking records, they're talking about a lot more than that. The way I put it is this Purview is a bowling ball. It's big, heavy, and round and hollow. And inside it, is a golf ball rattling around. That golf ball is the records management portion, but it's just a portion of the larger compliance. The words in record keeping and Purview completely different. You have to learn a whole new language. How technical is it? You're about to find out. I recommend to every one of my records clients, never go into event-based Purview alone. Take a IT person with you. And that's holding up pretty true so far. So Purview is not like a piece of software. In fact, it's not meant to be used by end users. It'll never be seen by users. It'll only be seen by you. It's a tool, not an app. Okay? So before we move on and do anything, you gotta know what case records are. Because another way to say event-driven retention is case records. So this is what it's all about. And I call case records the Achilles heel of the entire profession, because in my experience, the practitioners, that's you and me, we're all weak on this, very weak on this. Some of the vendors are weak on this as well. It is Purview's biggest weakness. Let me put that again. Case records are the biggest weakness of Purview. What is your biggest weakness? I'm willing to bet it is, guess what? Case records. So if you don't understand case records, you cannot possibly understand how Purview manages case records. So let's get the theory out of the way first, and then we'll look at Purview, okay? So all of you have a minimum of 60% of your records that are case records. And this has a profound effect on how SharePoint is architected or set up and governed. Again, I have YouTube videos, recorded webinars, training courses on the SharePoint architecture and on case records. So we're just touching it today very lightly, okay? But you need to know that Purview looks at all incoming records as black or white. You're either case or you're not. If your case is going to say, oh, you have an event-driven retention rule. Tell me the event date, and then I'll calculate whether it's eligible for destruction. If it's not a case, it looks at the age. It'll say today's date minus the date of the document, gives me the age, compare that with the retention rule. More on that later, okay? So you have to realize that every single record that flows into Purview is A, a case record, or B, not a case record, okay? Your retention schedule has to specify this. And don't even think about putting it into SharePoint, or sorry, Purview if you haven't done that. Again, look at my YouTube video on that, on how to do a software-ready retention schedule. This is what it looks like. I'm just going to turn on my laser pointer here. There we go. So one row in the retention schedule equals one category or business activity. And every single one of them has to specify yes or no. Am I a case or am I not? Now, that's not the language Purview uses, but the language doesn't matter. The principle is what matters, right? So case records are records belonging to a case category or business activity. A case business activity is related to a person, place, event, or thing. And what do they all have in common? Well, they all die. They all come to an end. The way I put it is like this. A case activity is divided into a series of repeated adventures. Each adventure generates a set of records unique to that adventure and ends at a time unique to that adventure. For example, audits, that's a case activity. You might do a health and safety audit in February, and it might take 2 months, and you'll generate a set of records, and it will come to an end. So that's adventure number one. We call that a case. Nothing happens until November. In November, you do a second audit of the financial statements. Different adventure, different set of records, different end date. But we cannot mix the two up. We have to keep them separate. So imagine you had 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects. Well, that means that each contract is a case, each employee is a case, and each project is a case. So if you were to have 1,000 of each, you would need to track and record 3,000 end dates and 3,000 separate batches of records that you have to keep separate from each other. That's what case records are. So if you look at this diagram here, the retention rule, let's say union grievances, grievance end date plus 10 years and destroy, that rule or that tag is applied to the case as a whole, not to individual documents. So think of it this way. All the records in a case are on a conveyor belt, 10 years wide, and when the conveyor belt has gone 10 years, the whole case is disposed of. Now, the opposite, 40% of the time, is admin records, or whatever you want to call them, non-case. But the way the software calculates it is it says, okay, we're going to apply retention to each individual document. And when the document ages 10 years, it ages out. Off the conveyor belt you go. Simple as that. There's no repeated adventure. These are activities that never really stop, okay? They generate records on a more or less continuous basis. So that leads to this uncomfortable reality, or at least it seems uncomfortable to some, which is, let's say we have 1,000 contracts. Then when someone puts a document into SharePoint about a contract, we have no choice but to force that user to tell us which contract is that document related to. We have no choice, because if we didn't, we'd be saying, here, SharePoint, I have a document about a contract, but it's a big secret. I'm not going to tell anybody what contract this is related to. Well, that's kind of silly, right? So this is a mathematical reality. If we do have 1,000 contracts, someone does put a document in SharePoint about it, we must force them to tell us which of those 1,000 contracts this document is related to. How we do it doesn't matter. The mechanism doesn't matter. It can be a pop-up, a drop-down, a fly-out. Whatever the mechanism is doesn't matter. But mathematically, we cannot escape this, okay? Perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. If you have 10,000 employees, then yeah, you're going to need a list of 10,000 to choose from if you put a document in about an employee. So here's an example of a retention schedule with 253 categories in it. Imagine for a moment that each category or activity is a storage location in SharePoint called a library. Well, now we have 250 libraries for admin activities. We have 3 libraries for case categories. We have contracts, employees, and projects. But each of these 3 libraries is split into 1,000 cases. So we have 1,000 contracts, 1,000 employees, and 1,000 projects. Now, where are all our records going to go? Well, for 1,000 users, we would typically have 12,000 records a day. So where are those 12,000 going to go in SharePoint? They have to go somewhere. Well, if the records are about admin categories, which would be 40% or 7,200 a day, then they are going to go in one of these 250 different places. But what about the 60% or 4,800 libraries that are 4,800 records, sorry, that are about these 3 cases? Well, they could be about a contract, which means there's 1,000 possible places to go. They could be about employees, which means another 1,000 places to go, and so on. So in total, in SharePoint, for this example, we need 3,250 different places in SharePoint for those 12,000 records a day to go. That's your job. That's called the SharePoint information architecture, right? We've got to set aside places for cases. And in this example, there are 3,000 cases. And not only do we need 3,000 storage locations or places, but we also need to store 3,000 end dates. right? Because end dates can be different for every single case. So somehow we have to feed Purview those 3,000 dates. We have to make Purview aware that there are 3,000 cases, and you have to set up SharePoint with 3,000 places. All that has to come together. So some of the internal Purview theory. Let's pretend we do have 1,000 contracts, 1,000 projects, and 1,000 employees. That means we have 1,000 cases, right? Of each of those three, total 3,000. So we have 1,000 contracts, 1,000 projects, 1,000 employees. What Purview needs to know is what are the cases? It Purview doesn't know what a case is. It doesn't know where that boundary, where that rope lies. So you have to create something called an event type, okay? And an event type is tied to that category. And the event type is going to be split into events. Each event ties together all the records in a case, okay? Now, I'm going to say something right up front, which I hope will help avoid confusion later. Purview artificially defines the case outside of SharePoint. It doesn't know, Purview doesn't know which documents are members of my cases. It doesn't know. So you have to tell it in Purview. I don't like that approach. I'm going to show you an alternative approach where we organize the cases in SharePoint, not in Purview. But first, we're going to go and look at how Purview expects you to manage cases, okay? So the first element is event types. Each category has only one event type. So here we would have three types: contract end, project completion, and employment termination. The events are shown in yellow. You have to create these events in Purview. Do I think that's a good approach? No. Would I do it? No, absolutely not. But this is how Purview works out of the box. So let's at least study it, okay? So once you know the event, that's really the case. So you have to attribute all the documents in a case to that event. All right? So that's the methodology, that's the approach of how cases are defined in Purview, okay? Now, here are the key components we have to go through. We have to go through retention labels, event types, events, auto-apply retention rules, and asset IDs. Now, if you are not familiar with these things, then this is going to be Greek to you. Like I said before, there were 7 things you need to know in order to understand event-driven records in Purview. So we're going to have to go through all of these things. But I want you not to worry if you don't understand it all. Okay, don't worry about it. Um, it's impossible. I'll say that right now. It is utterly impossible to understand event-driven record keeping in Purview in 1 hour. It's not going to happen. But I am going to cover it, and you'll at least get a good high-level picture of how it's supposed to work, okay? All right. So another side note to get you ready, which is you all know that in SharePoint, in a library, you can have column names and column display names. What you might normally do in scenario 1 is you have a library called projects, another called employees, and another called contracts. You could have project end dates, termination dates, and contract end dates as a metadata column. No problem. But it is a problem for Purview. What you have to do for Purview is you have to have one column for all libraries that expresses the end date, okay? You can have a different display name, so your end date column in projects library can be called project end date. But this is just a mandatory requirement for Purview, okay? For reasons that will become evident later. Okay, now, one of the things you've got to be comfortable with is the M365 substrate. What is the M365 substrate? Well, if you haven't been there, then you're not ready for event-driven retention. It's the basement underneath M365. It takes six steps to get to the basement. 6 steps. And what it is it's the inner plumbing inside the drywall of M365. Not meant for end users, right? I'll repeat this. Purview is not an application software product for users. It is a tool for you, okay? A tool, a utility. So you're going to go down the basement and work inside the substrate, okay? That's unavoidable. This is Microsoft's official diagram of what the substrate is, and I'm going to take you there live just to show you a little bit. We're not going to do anything else, I don't think, live because A, it takes a long time when you're on a video call, and B, there's no point in it because each of the steps are time delayed. You can't move on to step 2 till you wait 3 days for step 1 to finish. But let's go to Purview, shall we? And I'll at least show you how to get to the substrate because that's where the fun lies. That's where you have to go, and I'll at least show you how to get there, okay? You can tell that it's a little delayed because the video call robs the computer of so much processing power. So here we go, we're in Purview now, and let's go down to the substrate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the M365 Admin Center. Then we're going, step 2 is show all. Step 3 is we're going to drill down to the SharePoint Admin Center. We're halfway there. You can see the delay here. Now we're in the SharePoint Admin Center. Step 4, see things slowing down here. Step 4 is more features. Step 5, we're almost there, is the search. And the last step, the very last step, is to manage the search schema. Now we're in the basement. As soon as it comes to life here. Here we are. Okay. And we're now in managed properties. So we have 2 types of properties. We have managed properties and crawled properties. So now that you know how to get there, I'll jump back into presentation. We'll come back here and revisit it a minute from now. Okay. First, I want you to understand what the search schema really is. Now, this is my version of the diagram. I created this diagram to help me understand it. You need to understand the difference between crawled properties and managed properties. Crawled properties are properties that are visible to the user in the Microsoft product. Here we have 3 products, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange. Each has native properties. What is a property? Well, it's the metadata that you can see and search and work with every day. In Exchange, you'll have to, from, CC, BCC, subject line, that's the metadata. In SharePoint, you'll have last modified date, create date, name, and all the fields that you put in, all the columns that you created. They're all called crawled properties. Now, the problem is that Purview is set back from all these 10 Microsoft products. I'm only showing 3 here, but it works on all 10. So it has to search on all 10, and all 10 products are completely different from each other. So what they do is they take all of these yellow crawled properties, put them in a blender, press puree. Out of the blender comes managed properties. Example, from. What does from mean? Well, it's crystal clear in Exchange. It's who the email is from. But what does from mean in OneDrive? Well, it might be the owner or the author. What does from mean in SharePoint? Well, maybe created by, or something like that. So it takes all three, makes the best guess as to how they are equal, and turns that into a green property called a managed property. So now in Purview, you can do a search of different Microsoft products, okay, with some degree of consistency between them. So that's called a managed property. When you're in Purview, you are not searching crawled properties. It's impossible. You're searching green properties, which are managed properties. Okay. Now, let me go back for a minute. These are the managed properties. There's probably 10,000 of them. These are the crawled properties. Now, I'm showing them to you in reverse order, right? Crawled properties are on the left. They're the yellow ones that are native to the products. And here they are, another 10,000 or so, okay? Crawled properties and managed properties. So that's what they look like. Now, there's a problem, or I shouldn't say a problem, there's a limitation, which is in order to manage event-driven retention rules, you have to use auto-apply rules. Now, there are other ways to use Purview. You can use Purview in an incredibly simple way, and it will never work, okay? You can get Purview up and running, fully deployed in an afternoon, easily, but it'll never be compliant. You want to know why? Watch some of my videos or take some of their training. We'll show you why. Auto apply is the only, let me repeat that, the only way to properly deploy Purview that will actually work and actually deliver compliance. So I have a whole webinar on that recorded on YouTube. So if you accept that, which I certainly do, which is that means that auto apply rules, which are a method of applying retention labels in Purview, they cannot use the crawl properties and they cannot use the managed properties. No, they can use neither one. So they can only use refinable strings, which is a predetermined type of managed property. It's really a variable, okay? So these are the limitations that we have to work around. We have to use auto-apply retention rules because that's the only safe way to deploy labels, which in turn means that we have to use a key query language query, which is a condition, which says apply this retention rule to this content, okay? Now, therefore, you have to use a refinable string. And a refinable string is a substitution for a column in a auto-apply rule. There's going to be lots of them, or you'll need lots of them, but there's only 100. That's it. There's only 100, then you've used up. So that's a severe internal limitation. Talk about how to get around that later, okay? So the idea is that you have to map a crawled property to a managed property, and then map a managed property to a refinable string. Only then can you use it in an event-driven retention rule, okay? So this is an example right here, refinable string 00. So I'll just jump right back into Purview momentarily there. Where are we in Purview? Right here. Now I'm in managed properties, right? If I search for refinable string, then it'll at least tell me what refinable strings are available to me. And here's the list right here. That's it. There's 100, no more, no less. That's it. And over here, you can see that I've already mapped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That means that only the remaining are available to me. Okay. So how do you go about mapping it? Well, I could show you, but it would take a minute. we would go into an available string, which in this case would be 6. And it's our findable string 6. Now we have to scroll to the bottom and find ourselves the managed property, which is the equivalent of the crawled property we're interested in. Okay, so these are the crawled properties, and you have to search for it. All crawled properties start with OWS underscore. So I'm just going to search on that. Again, don't worry about all the details. Don't ask yourself, why is he showing me this? Not yet, anyway. It'll come together in a minute, okay? Now, these are the crawled properties, the yellow ones. And uh, I pick which one I'm interested in, and then I click OK. I'm not going to do it because I'm already using up too many of my refinable strings, but you just pick one and map it to that refinable string. Okay. Now you know the technique. Let's go back to the presentation and see why we're doing that. Okay. Now, here's an example of the usage of refinable strings in auto applied rules. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 categories in the retention schedule or business activities, SOPs, union grievances, contracts, and so forth. So here we have SOPs, and we want 2 retention rules. One that says, well, if it's the actual published SOP, keep it for 25 years. But the other 499 documents used to create that aren't as important. They're digital debris, so let's throw that away in 5 years, okay? So what would you do in the KQL query? Now remember I said at the outset, this is one of the things you have to know to understand how to do event-driven retention. If you don't know this, then tune into one of my training courses, okay? I'll teach you how to do it. So here we have library name is standard operating procedures, and refinable string 1 contains yes. Refinable string 1 maps back to the column name published. So now we've used up refinable string 1 for the column published. So we have 2 auto apply policies. One says if published equals yes, then retention rule is 25 years. If published equals no, which is refinable string O1 contains no, then we're going to go with a different retention rule. So we've used up one refinable string in that one category. And if we keep going, you'll notice that we chew up one more per category, right? How many do we have? 99. Are they reusable? No. So how many categories are you likely to have in your retention schedule? Well, if it's an old-fashioned, inappropriate, and unusable retention schedule, like 99.99% of them all are on Earth, then you have 200 to 300. If it's a correct, proper, modern, software-ready retention schedule, and yes, I have YouTube's training on how to do that, then it has 800. 800 categories, which means you need 800 of these refinable strings. You only get 99. That's it. Okay. So what are you going to do? You're going to do custom programming. That's what we do to avoid this limit. You can get around it using custom programming. What I can say with some degree of confidence is that there's 2 ways to use Purview. One way is out of the box. Use what we call the GUI, the graphical user interface. Turns out that the limitations are coming from that software. If you avoid using the software and instead you use programming, a lot of the limitations melt away. That's what we're finding anyway. So this is a case where you want to use custom programming to get around that limit. Okay. So now we're going to actually go through an example of how to create event-driven retention rules for a library called audits. In it, we're going to create a column called doc type or document type. And, a typical document type column is going to have, could be planning and management, could be permits, could be drawings, could be anything. But this case, we want a value in the list called reports. If the document type equals reports, then we want this retention rule. Audit end date, that's the trigger, right? It's an event-driven end date, plus 5 years, then delete. Okay? That's what we're going to do. Step 1, we need to create the site column called document type. So we create the column, and we're going to make it a managed metadata column called doc types. And we're going to put 4 values in there, 4 terms: reports, plans, financial, and logistics. And we're going to add that to the audits via a content type, okay? This is just SharePoint 101. Create a new column. That's step 1. Step 2, we have to populate the column. Well, why on earth do we need to do that? Because the subsequent steps will not work unless it finds at least one actual document of that type. Even if it's a fake, you have to make it. Fake it to make it. You've got to put in a document that has that type in it. Okay? So you have to upload at least one document to that library that contains it. Okay? Now, you got to wait 3 days. I'm going to jot that down because I'm going to make a running total of the total wait time to do this. Why do you have to wait 3 days? Because that's how long it'll take to reindex SharePoint so that the document is findable. Okay, it's findable. So that's going to take 3 days. Now you could force a reindex now and cut short the 3 days to maybe half a day, but don't do that because that'll slow down SharePoint so much it'll make everybody angry. You don't want to do that. So wait 3 days. So 3 days has gone by. Now you want to know, did that work? Can I find my document? So you go to the audits library and you type this into the search bar, library search bar. Doc type OWS text equals reports. Okay? And assuming you find it, now why are you typing that in? Because that is the managed property. Okay? Not the crawled property, the managed property. So we're testing and confirming that that managed property is the one we're after. Okay? And if you find it, you're good to go. Step 4, you have to create an event type. And that ties together all the documents in a case. So we're going to create an event type called audit or audit end. Now, this is the tricky part. The way that Purview knows which documents are members of a case is external to SharePoint. It doesn't know what SharePoint has. We do, but Purview doesn't. So it's going to ask you to tell it which documents are members of which case so it can tie it to one event date. How does it do that, you ask? It's going to use a column called asset ID. Okay? Now, in SharePoint, there are roughly 170 columns on every single document, even before you create your first custom column. Okay? They're hidden, but they're all there. It's easy to get at. I'm assuming you know enough to do that. But one of them is called Compliance ID, which is the internal name for Asset ID. So what Purview is looking for is this saying, well, you've got millions of documents in SharePoint. Which ones are a member of this case? Which ones do I relate to this particular event? You tell it an Asset ID. Okay? It can be a custom column or it can be the compliance ID column. But you'll see here, they're tying together this document with asset ID ABC with this one, and down here with this one and this one. So each document in SharePoint has to have the same asset ID. Okay? Now, Purview wants to manage records in uh, Outlook, Exchange Outlook. Good for it. So how does it know which emails to tie together? Well, same concept, but different term. It wants a keyword. What's a keyword? It's anything you want it to be. But we're going to create 1,000 cases. You create 1,000 events, and if you want to manage and apply disposition to those emails, you have to give each email a keyword of the same name that's unique from all the other 1,000 keywords. Okay. So that's a nightmare, I had to confess. So you had to go to every one of these emails and stick the keyword inside each one of them. I just don't see that happening. I just don't see it happening. But that's the way it works out of the box. Now, step 5, we're going to basically create the case, which we're going to create an audit end date event, which is their language for the case. We're now going to create a new event. Did you know they had a creating capability? Or maybe I just can't spell today, but we're going to create a new event called Audit Health and Safety June 2025 or whatever, right? And it's going to come underneath the event type audit end, okay? Now, if we're managing records in Exchange, which I do not recommend, then you have to inject this keyword into every email. Where in the email? Wherever you want. Go into that email, edit it, and stick Health and Safety June 25 in the email body or the subject line, doesn't matter where. And then do it for every single email that's a member of that case. And it has to be spelled exactly, perfectly, correctly each and every time, or it won't associate it with the case. Okay. So similarly for SharePoint, every document must have the same compliance asset ID column, Health and Safety, June 2025. And every document must contain that exact string spelled exactly correctly each and every time. Okay. So I'm going to discount this completely. I'm going to say, let's not go there for Exchange. That's more than a little insane. But this you have to do in SharePoint. You have to have a column that stitches together all the documents in a given case. Now, let's go to step 6. We need to build ourselves a refinable string for the column document type or doc type. Okay. So we go to the basement, the search schema. These are the 6 steps. We find the next available refinable string and we map it to doc type, which is going to turn out to be OWS underscore doc type text. I didn't bother with the TEXT in the end, but there will be. Okay. So now you have a refinable string that maps back to the column in SharePoint called document type. Step 7, we need another refinable string for the name of the library. Why? Because what are we doing? We're trying to say for all documents where the library name equals audits and the document type contains report, those are the documents that we want to apply the retention rule to, okay? And the retention rule is end of the audit plus 5 years, then destroy, okay? So we're just going to do the same process again for library name. We're going to go to the search schema, find another refinable string, and it's going to be called OWS list title. That's an internal name for the library. The good news is that you don't have to ever define it again. So it's good for life. Now you can use that refinable string over and over and over again as many times as you want and tell it what it must contain, i.e. the name of the library. Okay. Optionally, you can define an alias for that refinable string called library name. Yeah, refinable strings have aliases. How cool is that? I find that very handy. Now, we've done that for library name, but guess what? We need to test to make sure we did it right. Purview has no error checking. Let me repeat that. Purview has no error checking. What's the implication? The implication is that if you make one mistake, you'll never know. It doesn't check. Okay. So you've got to be careful with it. Again, it's not meant for end users. It's a tool meant for you and you alone. Okay. So how do we test it? Well, we're going to just search for that property in SharePoint, but we can't because we have to wait 3 days. I'm going to write down 3 days for the for that to show up. Okay. Step 8. 3 days went by. We did a search. It worked. Now we know both refinable strings are active. Now we have to create a retention label called audit end date, 5 years and delete. These are the parameters we're going to put in it. Now, again, I'm assuming you know how to create retention labels. This one is going to say 5 years triggered by an end date called audit end. It's going to mark items as a record, start a disposition review. Okay. So this is a wizard you fill out on the screen. We do that. Now, the label is just sitting there. It's not doing anything. It hasn't been applied to anything. Obviously, we had to apply it. Remember I said earlier that the only safe way to create, to apply a label is with an auto-apply rule. So that means we have to create an auto-apply policy, okay? And in there is where we put the instruction, which says refinable string 45 equals audits, that's the library name, and refinable string 00 or whatever it was equals reports. That's the doc type equals reports. So we do that. Now, we're going to test the policy before we run it, but that takes up to 3 days. So I'm going to add another 3 days. So we're up to 9 days so far, day 9, okay? Now, if you're doing it the way they recommend, then you have to enter health and safety June 25 in SharePoint when the retention label is manually applied. But if you watch any other of my YouTube videos, do not do that. Never allow anyone to manually apply a retention label. If you do, I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to make you 2 promises. One, SharePoint, Purview will never work properly. And number 2 is you will never be able to do a disposition. I don't have time now to explain all that, but you can watch the YouTube videos and find out. Okay, that's my promise to you. This is how you ruin your Purview for life. Anyway, if you're managing email, then users have to enter this in every email without making any typing mistakes. So now this is how users enter or contribute documents to the cases. All right, that's it. Nothing to it? I don't know about that, but that's what you have to do. Here are my conclusions. Purview stores event dates in Purview, not in SharePoint, along with the records. I think that's backwards. It's not very practical for email at all. I think the proper way to manage email as records is to get them into SharePoint. The 100 refinable strings is a severe limitation, so severe that it forces you to go to programming mode. Okay? And I don't like the way cases are defined. Like this whole business of asset ID, really? I mean, that's a bit crazy. So I think there's a better way to do it. And this is what we do in real life. And we overcome the limitations. We like to make the cases in SharePoint, not in Purview. Okay? So the cases are self-evident, they're obvious. And we like to store the event dates in SharePoint, not in Purview. And that makes sense to us because that's where they live, along with the records. So for every category in your retention schedule, you create an equivalent library of the same name. In the retention schedule, let's pretend 800 categories. We have 60% of 800 is 480 on the right here. Okay. And they're all applying retention to cases. 320 are 320 are on the left, which are individual documents. Okay. Now, that's the bottom layer. The middle layer, SharePoint, adds metadata. So now we have metadata for each of these 800 libraries. And the metadata for each library is uniquely different from the other 799. Of those libraries, 480 on the right are subdivided into document sets. A document set is a case. One of the columns is the end date. How convenient is that? Simple, straightforward, everything together in one place. Okay. And at the top of this are content rules. What are content rules? That's how you assign retention rules to your records. They're called auto apply rules. Now, you could, again, you could deploy Purview with no auto apply rules and have the users manually assign retention rules. But that is a death sentence. Don't do it. Okay, it's just a big mistake. Somebody quote me on that. Okay, anyway, the way this works is the auto apply policy would say if library equals audits and final report equals yes, apply this retention rule down here. And if it's no, apply this different or shorter retention rule up here. So in our real world life, in 800 categories, we typically create 3 of these per library. So you'd be creating 2,400 of these, okay? But they work automatically in the background and they don't make mistakes. What does an auto apply policy look like? Well, here it is right here. The library name is refinable string 45 equals audits, and refinable string 0 equals reports, right? Once again, we're using refinable strings. And this is the label we're applying right here. 10 years, then delete. So the document sets are the magic to this approach. Each case is a document set in library, in the library. So it's evident, clearly evident to the user where their records go. I go into competitive procurement. Each procurement is an adventure with a different name, and mine is about the laptop refresh 2025 adventure, right? Clean, simple, reliable. So my conclusion is the out-of-the-box technique will work, but it's not the best way. I don't think it's going to work, quite frankly, for 3 reasons. Refinable string limitations, event dates are disconnected from the records, and I believe that the proper way is to use custom programming. Please don't even think about about managing email in place. Rather, bring your email into SharePoint. How do you do that? Buy yourself an email integration package between that integrates Exchange with SharePoint. And then in Outlook, you just drag and drop into SharePoint. Simple, clean, that's the way to go. And that takes out a whole level of complexity away from Purview. And don't forget your content rules. Auto apply policies are the magic, okay? So custom programming is the way to go. Now, if you want to do all this faster, then look into our Catalyst tools. We do have a set of tools we use to deploy Purview very rapidly and very simply and overcoming the limitations. And that's called Catalyst. We have a website for that, and we have YouTube videos that include how we use that, okay? Now, we have enough time for a few questions. Question 1. How do I get around the limitation of 100 strings, but can I use a more general term in SharePoint? For example, uh, calling all the different types of end dates, audit end date. No, it's the exact opposite of what you got to do. You got to reverse that. You have to use one end date column and reuse it for every single library you have. That's how you get around the limitation, right? Yeah, avoid the asset ID. Yeah, you definitely want to avoid that. Is it possible to map multiple properties returning the same values? Yes, no to a single refinable string and use it in KQL queries across multiple locations. Yes, but only programmatically. So that works as long as you're programmatically doing it. Now, I don't know if you consider this, good news or bad news, but what we've learned here at RimTech is that if we want to avoid the limitations and get Purview deployed properly and in a guaranteed way that works, we are finding that we're using the user interface less and less and less. We're doing more and more of it programmatically. And you know what? It actually works quite well that way. But using the user interface, oh my God, the limitations are soul crushing. Really, they are. And the good news is that they can all be overcome as long as you're willing to do programming instead of use the user interface. So that's why I say if you want to manage event records, which we have no choice 60% of the time, bring your IT person along with you, okay? And let's do some programming and get this job done. Are there any other questions? Well, I encourage you to take some of our training courses or at least view our YouTube videos because a lot of the moving parts and infrastructure that you covered today are in there, okay? All right. So thank you for taking time out of your valuable day to listen to me. I truly appreciate it. And if you ever want to know more, just give me a call. Don't hesitate to pick up the phone and give me a call. Okay, I'm all ears. So thank you, and I really appreciate it. Truly do.